Hey sailors, welcome to another mission briefing. This one's going to be 005, and it's going to deal with Betrieb Sturmflut, or Operation Stormflood, or Storm Surge, depending on your translation. This is essentially Rommel's last victory against the Allied. He was facing off against the U.S. Second Corps at Kasserine Pass, dealt him a tactical defeat, although, of course, the Allies would recover quickly and able to eliminate the Tunisia pocket in North Africa. But this is Rommel's last kick at the cat, as it were. So without further ado, let's get into it. Tunisia lies on the north coast of Africa, roughly center-left in the Mediterranean Sea. Here it's outlined in red and white. And it's bordered by Libya in the east and Algeria in the west. The southern half of the country forms part of the Sahara Desert, while the northern portion is hillier, being the eastern extent of the Atlas Mountains, is wooded and generally better irrigated. The eastern and western dorsal peaks form that east section of the Atlas Mountains. Due to the rugged nature of the terrain in this region, transit through the mountains was through several strategic passes, such as Kasserine or the Gap of Sabiba, which is just to the northeast of Kasserine. And this allowed for the use of the few good roads in the region. Therefore, control of these positions was paramount for both the attacker and the defender and would have to factor into all plans. In late January, for example, von Arnim took Fade Pass, which is in the vicinity of Sidi Bouzid, as one of these strategic passes from the French and inflicted a devastating defeat on the French forces. He basically brushed them aside. Kasserine Pass lies in the west central region of Tunisia and is a gap of roughly 3.2 kilometers in the grand dorsal chain of the Atlas Mountains that terminates in Tunisia. The gap itself at its narrowest point is roughly 800 meters. Just to the northeast of the pass lies the Gap of Sabiba, where the Northern Thrust conducted operations consisting of 21 Panzer Division. Approximately 100 kilometers to the southeast lies Sidi Bouzid and Fade Pass, where General von Arnim crushed the U.S. Second Corps and the French 19th Corps in the days before the Battle of Kasserine Pass. Following the Operation Torch landings of Vichy French North Africa in Morocco and Algeria on 8 November 42, Allied troops cleared the way for the Anglo-American First Army to advance east along the coast in a race to capture Tunis and interrupt Axis supply lines in North Africa. Simultaneously, Montgomery's 8th Army would move westward from Egypt and Libya and hemming in the Germans and Italians into Tunisia. To thwart this race towards Tunis, Germany sent in the 5th Panzer Army to bolster the Italians and General Rommel's Africa Corps. Thus, by early 1943, there were approximately 104,000 German and 74,000 Italian troops in Tunisia. One benefit that the Axis would enjoy throughout most of the Tunisian campaign was significant air superiority from the many bases in Sicily and nearby Italy. In January 43, the German defensive line ran along the eastern side of the eastern dorsals, with no strategic depth. The 5th Panzer was stationed in the north, while the German-Italian Panzer Army under Rommel was in the south along the Mareth line, and there were minimal forces in the country's center. This defensive line left an opening for a likely Allied effort to exploit through the Kasserine Sfax towards the Gulf of Gabes that could effectively cut the German and Italian forces into two. Luckily for the Germans, the comparatively ill-trained and equipped French were handling the sector, along with the unaggressive U.S. Second Corps under Friedel, while along the Mareth line, General Montgomery's 8th Army was struggling with supply issues and could not conduct any large-scale maneuvers. Thus, on 30 Jan, von Arnim attacked the French at Fade Pass and Ribot Pass, which would have been primary access points for any Allied offensive towards the Gulf. He shrugged off some ineffectual American-led counterattacks on the 31st, and so the 5th Panzer now held the passes. This would provide temporary relief from any threat of an Allied assault through that corridor. And these actions would set the stage for the eventual Operation Rommel envisioned. This slide briefly overviews some key dates in the North Africa campaign. On 30 January, 5th Panzer took Fade Pass from the French, and on 14 Feb, Operation Spring Wind began, which saw the German 5th Panzer Army assaulting the American 2nd Corps at Sidi Bouzid. In 4 days of heavy fighting, the Americans were mauled, and General Friedenau ordered his forces to retreat towards the west, forming a new line in front of Kasserine, Sabiba, Ustelcia. General von Arnim, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, had initially disagreed with Rommel on the offensive, preferring to maintain their positions and gain strength, especially after his recent Operation Spring Wind. However, at midnight on February 18th, he was ordered to contribute some units to support Rommel's attack, which began on dawn 19th February, 0630 hours. The Anglo-American Army consisted of 4 corps, of which one was the U.S. 2nd Corps, the other being the French 19th Corps, under General Louis-Marie Coultz. The U.S. 2nd Corps was under General Friedenau, and altogether were under nominal command of General Sir Kenneth Anderson, who was commander of this first Anglo-American Army. However, as a side note, the French forces would refuse to work directly for the British because of the 1940 events in the country, and so there was a cumbersome relationship developed. They would have a liaison officer who was an American working for General Anderson, leading to unnecessary complications in command and control. Later, Eisenhower would add the U.S. 2nd Corps to the 1st Army in late January of 43, which would eventually bring up that formation to the 4 corps I mentioned. The 2nd Corps under Friedenau was generally inexperienced and also suffered poor communication between the 1st Army and its subordinate units, with at times conflicting commands. General Friedenau sometimes bypassed his subunit headquarters to talk directly to the subordinates, further muddling affairs. The Free French 19th Corps, for its part, was generally poorly equipped, and the men were ill-trained due in part to the armistice that France had signed when it surrendered. Thus, most of the infantry were of the light roll with few heavy weapons and vehicles, as their origins lay in defending French African colonies. Those vehicles that they did possess were light armored and obsolete. The CSCT was the primary French unit at the time, and it initially consisted of only 5 infantry battalions. However, this would later be enforced with the DMC, and therefore forming the 19th Corps. 5th Corps under Lieutenant General Charles Alfrey, and he was generally involved in the actions at Kasserine Pass through 6th Armored Division and 26th Armored Brigade. Those units were eventually sent into the Battle of Kasserine Pass by General Anderson to support the fight there. The Germans, for their part, in December, had deployed forces in northern Tunisia to prevent its easy acquisition by the Allies from the west, and this was accomplished by Italians and Germans from Sicily and Italy under the umbrella of 5th Panzer Army. Further reinforcements by Rommel's Panzer Army Africa were retreating from Libya, were added to this mix to eventually bring up the Axis numbers in Tunisia. Panzer Army Africa under Rommel was renamed in January 43 as the Italo-German Panzer Army, as at this time it consisted of 1 German and 3 Italian corps. Further, in late February, this unit, later shortened to the 1st Italian Army, was combined with 5th Panzer Army to form Army Group Africa under Rommel's leadership until General von Arnim replaced him in early March. Overall command in the theater was held by Comando Supremo, which was an Italian headquarters, with Field Marshal Kasserine in an advisory capacity. He was also in charge of the Luftwaffe in the Mediterranean at the time. Operation Sturmflut would involve the 5th Army's 10th and 21st Panzer Divisions, along with Rommel's forces. The 10th would eventually join Rommel's forces on the 20th, while the 21st would be running a holding attack against Sabiba Gap against the British units there. Recognizing that the Allied forces facing them were weak in the center south of the line, there were several plans designed to exploit the situation. Early and ambitious plans by von Arnim called for a push from the south towards Le Kef, intending to cut off the British units in the north, as he saw the major threat of the northern British 2 corps as more essential to deal with. This operation, called Operation Kakuzeg, was reviewed by Kasserine and Commando Supremo in the first few days of February. Rommel, for his part, saw the advantage of thrusting armored units into the weakened southern flank of the Allied line at the same time. However, his goal was 2 corps and its supply chain. This goal required a push towards Tebessa, which was the center of General Friedenau's command and where his command post was, and the Allied supply chain as well. This operation would be called Operation Sturmflut and involved a holding attack conducted by 21st Panzer from the 5th Panzer Army at the attack in the Gap of Sabiba while the Afrika Korps pushed through Kasserine Pass. Commando Supremo devised a solution in two coordinated attacks that might meet both commanders' desires. One armor began his Operation Spring Wind, the attack on Sidi Bouzid, on 14 February, which was a resounding success. However, he failed to continue pursuing the retreating American and French forces. Rommel sent an urgent message to Kasserine on 18 February in exasperation at this, and he asked for a battle group from 5th Panzer to be attached immediately to him to initiate an attack through Kasserine towards the Tebessa Allied Supply Center and then onto the coast of Beaune. At midnight on 18 February, Commando Supremo approved Rommel's operation, which was given the codename Operation Sturmflut. And at first light on the 19th, at 0630 hours, the attack commenced. This excellent battle map from the Osprey Campaign Series number 152 on the Battle of Kasserine Pass shows the details of the actions that occurred over the 3 days, 20 to 22 February 1943. An initial defensive line had been established across the narrowest part of the pass, some 800 meters in width, including extensive minefields that American engineers were hastily laying. However, given the hasty preparedness of their minefields, many of them were visible lying on the ground or barely covered. However, those defenses did stall the initial attack by DAC, and a breakthrough did not occur until the following day at 1630 hours, when 10th Panzer finally joined the Afrika Korps. This breakthrough would isolate the U.S. units on the two adjacent hilltops of the pass, Jebel Samama to the east and Jebel Cham to the west. During the nighttime, German units had also been trying to infiltrate past the American defenses through the rocky hills to minimal success, though they would capture some hilltops. Somewhat ironically, the U.S. units on Samama had left their armored half-tracks at the base of the mountain as it was impassable to vehicles, and now surrounded, they were unable to reach them. The Germans gleefully commandeered them to further their assault deeper into the pass, as they had been using trucks primarily at this point. Once through the pass, the 10th Panzer headed directly north towards Thala, and at the same time the DAC forces directly towards the northwest and the road to Tebessa. At this point, they were effectively two separate forces because in the center of the pass, running down here through the center, is a wadi, which was at full surge, and it was impassable aside from several strategic locations. At this point, the Allies were in some disarray and receiving mixed communication from higher formations. However, Allied resistance was growing as General Anderson's 1st Army commander released holding units near the pass to support the defenses. This again was primarily the 26th Armored Brigade and 5 Corps to help fortify Thala up in the north of the pass. As mentioned, the Axis were at this point effectively split into two forces, with a third one on the way, and that was von Armand's Panzers. He was supposed to send in his heavy tanks, his Tigers. However, he kept delaying, and they would not actually make entrance into the pass before the battle had come to its conclusion. Thus, this meant that they would not be at their strongest against a stiffening resistance. 10th Panzer finally hit a wall at Thala and was repulsed by heavy artillery fire, and again the 5th Armored units that were coming in from the Brits, while the DAC forces ran into opposition at Buchesko Pass and were pushed off the high ground they had recently captured by the 3rd Battalion 16th Infantry. Then Combat Command Bravo from the 1st Armored counterattacked from the north to stop them cold. And meanwhile, Allied air power had begun to dominate as fighter bases had been set up forward, and eventually 117 sorties of fighters were sent to the Germans on 22 February alone. By the afternoon of the 22nd, the German forces began to retreat southwards. Von Armand's heavy tanks, as I mentioned, never entered the battle, as this point it was too late because of his stalling tactics. And finally, on the 25th of February, 3 days after the Germans had left the area, the Allies slowly returned to their old positions. So what happened? Considered a tactical victory for Rommel and a disaster for 2 Corps, the result will be the formation of Army Group Africa under Rommel's short-lived command. It was Kasserine and Commando Supremo's intent to prevent bickering between the senior commanders, such as between von Arnim and Rommel. Unfortunately, the battles over the past months had seriously depleted Rommel's health, so he left for the rest and recuperation in Germany, while von Arnim took command of Army Group Africa. The Allies also undertook many changes at the highest level, forming a new 18th Army Group with command over the 1st and 8th British Armies and a semi-autonomous 2nd Corps, while the indecisive General Friedenthal was relieved of his command and replaced by General Patton. General Patton had earlier been in charge of the 1st U.S. Corps on the west coast of Africa, kicking his heels while this battle was going on. He would eventually relieve and replace General Friedenthal. This new combined army group would see the conquest of Tunisia in May of 43, after which it was disbanded and when the last German units had surrendered. There are other changes coming for the U.S., primarily in acting in a more cohesive manner, as the February fighting showed that haphazard commitments impacted performance. In the battles, no division had fought as a whole. It was always piecemeal reaction to the circumstances. This reorganization would help the U.S. win its first significant battle with the Wehrmacht in the Battle of El Guetar on 23 March 1943. Again. So looking at some scenarios on ASL Scenario Archive, this is what I was able to find. There's basically 7 scenarios dealing with Kasserine Pass. Now, 3 of them are reprints of each other. There's Crisis of Kasserine, which initially was in Out of the Bunker. I don't have this magazine, or Dispatches as well, which was a reprint of it. Although there was some changes in the squad types. You had 23, and now you used to have 24. You have 16 tanks for the German Italians, and before you used to have 19. So they balanced the forces a little bit and re-released it. This version was reprinted eventually in Hollow Legion's 3rd edition, which is the version that Dave and I are going to be playing in a few weeks, probably. Well, a couple of weeks we'll probably be tackling this one. There's also Gift of Time, which is another one for Kasserine, which we may or may not get to, we're not sure. Again, came out in Hollow Legion, originally a reprint of an ASL 97 scenario. Africa Corps, these 2 right here are from Critical Hit, and I have no Critical Hit products, so I cannot speak to them. I know nothing about them. So, Crisis of Kasserine Pass is an interesting one that Dave and I are going to be tackling. Again, it's a fairly straightforward one. Desert boards, and you're going to have about 40-something squads and 16 vehicles making their way from the right side of the map to the west side of the map, trying to punch through the Americans and a couple of French cannons set up in the hills and exit off the left side of the map. So it should be interesting from that perspective. Seems to be favoring the Germans in this one, although again we're going to give it a couple of kicks to see how it plays out. Should be interesting one. I'm looking forward to playing this one. Finally, here are some links that I used in my research. Again, these are all available in the description of the video, so click on them by all means. Ones that were really handy were the top 2. First of all, you have this one here from the Americans. Again, it's a very lengthy page. You're going to have to go up to here, and you can punch forward 23 and 25 if you want to see the earlier pages. There's no links inside the page to go back and forth, but you can work the pages like that. 25, I'm not sure what that deals with. I think it's the aftermath, shift to northern Tunisia. There you go. So you can play around like that and work the different pages. And it's a quite lengthy treatise on what happened there from the American perspective. Including things such as my numbers I got for losses incurred by the Allies that the Germans claim, as well as what they lost themselves, what they claim, and what the Germans lost eventually as well. Again, this is where I got my numbers from that you saw earlier in this slide. So I highly recommend that one. There's also this other one here. Again, it's a compilation of different entries, all dealing with Kasserine Pass, and it's various historical extracts, including 5th Panzer Army Diary, various battle reports from different time periods. So it's quite an extensive list again, quite contemporary to the time when it was written by and large. So again, 2 handy resources. Again, the first one and the second one, as well as I highly recommend this bottom one. This is from Oxford Osprey's Publishing, and it's Rommel's Last Victory, Kasserine Pass, 1943. Again, you can get it on Kindle for 20 bucks. So if you're really interested in what's going to go on, I highly recommend that as a source. And there we have it. Mission briefing number 5, Operation Stormflut. Again, 1824, February 1943, the Battle of Kasserine Pass. Wins 2 Corps. The U.S. Second Corps was dealt a serious blow. On the plus side, they learned some serious lessons, and they were able to capitalize on that, especially when they got a kick-ass commander like Patton put in charge, as happened in Sicily when he was just walking his way up the west coast of Sicily. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let me know if you like to see other reports, what you would like to see them on. Give me some explicit examples so that I can have something to look forward to. I'm not sure what I'm going to do after this one for mission briefings. Possibly something in Africa, maybe something in Europe. I'm really not sure. So if you guys have any things you want me to cover, by all means enter them down below. Pacific I'm not going to touch until 2024 when Dave and I work up the fortitude to tackle all those crazy new rules. And at that point, we'll be doing some serious mission briefings of those battles I fought there. But in the interim, that's enough for me. Mission brief number 5. Let me know what you think. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.